So Against All Enemies really focused on the radicalization of our former military and the draw that many of our veterans feel towards these far-right extremist groups. And in that film, you had a very unique perspective because when you were first home from war, you had the opportunity to fall into that kind of right-wing pipeline, and you chose to go the other way. So both films dealt with the growing extremism of the far right and the role that our veterans play in that world. Where do you think we sit now when it comes to those issues?
So as we're recording this, just hours ago, I published a piece about techno-fascism. And in that piece, I write about how the coup is already happening. It was broadcast, the plan was broadcast, and it is being implemented. So what I try to do with my platform is convince Americans that all hope is not lost. It is not too late to act. It is not too big of a problem for individual Americans to pick themselves up and try and solve. Where are we? We are in a constitutional crisis. Where are we? We're in, the end stages of the democratic experiment, if everyone stays on the sidelines. And what you have seen is these two movies, documentaries, are the result of not just years of my work in counter extremism, but of my life experience as a disillusioned vet, as someone who deployed to a war. I deployed to Iraq in 2005, experienced really terrible things, came home to a country that didn't give a shit, that didn't care about my sacrifices or my friends getting hurt or killed, or after we came home, a lot of them ending their own lives. I came home to indifference and being lied into a war, having really truly believed in it, harboring, frankly, racist and Islamophobic beliefs, being a New Yorker, a kid. I was 16 when 9/11 happened, right? All of these things made me who I am today. And I could have gone down a far different path. I was a Ron Paul libertarian when I got out of the military in 2007. In 2008, I was the closest thing I've ever done to really campaigning or getting involved in a political campaign, aside from a few TikTok videos last year, was me running around my hometown spray painting Ron Paul Revolution, right? And it was my type of veterans supportive of the Ron Paul campaign, who became the Oath Keepers. That is who Stuart Rhodes is. He was on the Ron Paul campaign in 2008. And he was fed, like I was fed, this ideology, this mythology, this myth that the election of 2008, the primary election for the Republicans of 2008, was stolen from Ron Paul. And John McCain was the usurper. It was the same narrative that Donald Trump was using in 2016, and then he won. So people don't really remember the stolen election lie from 2016. Then he used it again in 2020, and then he started using it again in 2024, but he won that one too. So, all of my expertise on the far right comes from the seeds of having been there and almost going down that path and understanding the psychology of these folks because I was there.
Yeah. This is the thing. I think that a lot of people who have been to war, and correct me if I'm wrong, because of course I haven't. My closest veteran in my family is my father-in-law. My husband moved all around the world with the U.S. Navy, and they lived all around the world. And so it's a very, very pro-military family that I married into. And I'm, of course, Canadian by birth. So we don't have the same sort of military background, really. Although my grandfather on my father's side did fight in World War I and World War II, which is very rare. But I feel like if you are a veteran, you build this camaraderie with people overseas. You build this camaraderie with your unit or with the military in general. And then once you're out of the military, it's almost like you're set adrift. You are alone. And in some ways, people seek out groups that will make them feel like they belong again, especially groups when you have been a part of a unit for so long that you seek that out stateside. But then the problem becomes if you are radicalized while you are seeking that unit stateside, we essentially have homegrown American trained terrorists on our own shores, people that can use their military training against their fellow citizens because they feel like they have been abandoned. Do you find that?
There are so many threads to pull on in everything that you just said. Like there are
Right.
books focused on each individual part of everything that you just asked. So let me just try to choose a few. So a lot of folks, think about combat veterans and war veterans and make the assumption that, it is the experience at war that builds this camaraderie, this small unit cohesion, this brotherhood or sisterhood. It is not just that. From the first day of basic training, it is ingrained in you that you have to trust the man or woman to your left and right with your life. And with that builds a real appreciation. From basic training on, you are taking care of each other. You're physically protecting one another. There are political dynamics within any group. Right? People think about politics as Republicans and Democrats. You're playing politics when you're in first grade and you're choosing your friend group, right? When somebody's getting bullied, that is politics. In the military, politics at the micro level is you keeping each other from harm, whether that's the drill sergeant seeing your buddy mess up on the first day of basic training, or that's, someone pulling you out from a doorway because you're accidentally walking into a kill zone, or what we call a kill zone in the military, where you're likely to get shot. So it is not just combat vets. A lot of people look at Stuart Rhodes, the guy who led the Oath Keepers and was convicted of sedition before Donald Trump gave him a free pass and let him out of jail. They see the eye patch and they think, oh, this guy must be a combat vet. No, he shot himself at the range because he's an idiot. The man has never deployed to a combat zone, but he does carry this military persona, and he allows people to make up their own beliefs when they see the pirate patch over his eye. That is a deliberate thing. That is a deliberate presentation that he's bringing forward. But back to what we're focusing on, this kind of like brotherhood, the sisterhood, the small unit cohesion. In the 1950s and the 1960s, when we were in a different era of warfare and veterans, we had places like American Legion halls and VFW halls. There were things like the Elks Club. There were third spaces. I mean, when I was a kid, I was born in 85. Bowling and the pool hall were like popular places, not just for kids, but for adults to go to on Fridays and Saturdays. Those places simply don't exist, especially in the post-pandemic world. But really, since 2000, I think things, as they've become more online, as relationships, as business, as commerce has become more online, so have we as human beings, as Americans, and we've lost those interpersonal relationships that used to allow people to not just transition out of the military in a more healthy way, but actually do things like network, to build community, to get jobs. That type of infrastructure doesn't exist but for one thing for veterans now, and that's the GI Bill. So unless a veteran opts to go to school or to join a training program using their GI Bill, where they may be in a community where they're surrounded by other veterans who are going through the same thing. And that was really the thing that saved me, was my Student Veterans of America group way back in my community college, like over 10 years ago. Without having and being lucky enough to land in a place with that community, you're left adrift. Whether or not you served in combat, you went from this small unit cohesion, this thing where you literally trust the person that you work with your life, to going back into the civilian world where, frankly, my impression, the thing that I felt the most was that everyone was so selfish. No one cared about each other. And it felt alien to me to come back to the United States and to see people not really care about anyone but themselves.
Yeah, but I don't think that that's just isolated to people who come back from war. I think most of us nowadays feel very isolated. You're saying post-pandemic, online culture, we've all lost our third spaces. It's not just, Elks clubs and Lions clubs and bowling alleys. It's everything. It's, small town coffee shops. It's main streets. It's all these places that we used to be able to gather that we don't. And we are increasingly isolated. And that often draws people to places where there are communities. And that is often far-right extremism, but it's also church. It's why people end up back in churches and then they do what their church leader says. I think the thing is that like the concept of all of these movies you've been in and the concept of these people